What I'm going to talk about today, we are live. We are live. And I mentioned that Semlar, I think that's what it was called, public company. So they saw their share jump from, I don't know what it was, like $10 yesterday to $30 after they announced that Bitcoin, they're holding Bitcoin on their treasury. And this isn't going to be something that a couple of companies do, because when other companies see this, they're paying attention, right? They're paying attention to this stuff. They saw MicroStrategy shares go from like what, $50, $40 before Bitcoin to $2,000. It might have been less than that actually. Now they see Metaplanet, they had to actually halt their shares over in Japan last week because their share price was going up so much after they announced that they were buying Bitcoin. And then yesterday we saw Semlar, the price jump from $5 or $10 to $35 after they announced that they're buying Bitcoin. So people are taking note. This isn't something that's going to slow down. It's going to accelerate here. And the one thing I would say, if you think about think about the 60-40 model of investing. That's kind of all we had. Our parents went through it. I'm sure, depending on what age you are, you went through it. I've gone through it for sure. I've been in that old system with 60% allocated to stocks, 40% allocated to bonds. And so the first thing I want to say here, this is just like the easiest low-hanging fruit here, is take a look at your investment portfolio, whether it's through your work or wherever that is, whatever your legacy system investment portfolio is, take a look at it. I'm sure that a few people in this chat here have no idea what their pension's going towards, what's being held in there. Because I know that the audience here is more advanced than the average person in terms of the investments. But at the same time, I think that there's still a ton of people out there who don't have a clue about investments and investing and where their wealth is being stored in right now, which is pretty sad. And we've kind of just put our full trust and our full faith into these financial advisors to make the best decisions for us. And as we know, that's not always the case, right? They have a job. They have to sell the products that make the most money. That's their job. And so it's not always the best interest of the person. So the easiest thing to do would be take a look at your portfolio, see what's being held in there. If you have any sort of government bonds in that portfolio, swap it instantly for Bitcoin. Bitcoin ETF, any of these companies, swap it ASAP. Because think about what the bonds are. Although they're a horrible investment for one, but essentially what you're doing there is you're actually lending your money, lending your energy to the government. That's what you're doing when you're buying government bonds. You're lending them money, which if you're a Bitcoiner, that's a cardinal sin in Bitcoin, is not only being okay with the government existing, but you're actually funding the government and keeping their operations going for longer. You're keeping them relevant by owning bonds. So the easiest thing you can do there is swap out your bonds for Bitcoin. And so this is the strategy that I came up with here, is that you should be doing that today, getting out of your bonds. First one, that's the easiest thing that you can do, and move that into one of three things. The first one, the Bitcoin ETF, no brainer, MicroStrategy, and Semlar. And keep an eye out every time you see a company, a public company, announce that they're going to hold Bitcoin on their balance sheet, buy some shares. Take a look, make sure that they're making money first, take a look at their profit and loss, make sure that they're cash flow positive and they have some earnings there. But any company going forward who announces that they're buying Bitcoin, buy some of their shares, because you're crazy not to. It's one thing to hold Bitcoin, the ETF. I think that's a good first step. But if you think about what these companies are going to be doing here with this strategy, it's genius. And this is what Michael Saylor's been doing at MicroStrategy for the last couple of years. But essentially what they're doing is they're using Bitcoin to raise funds and buy more Bitcoin. So if you believe in Bitcoin, these companies are going to be holding Bitcoin. Essentially what they're doing is you're multiplying that. You're multiplying the Bitcoin that they're going to own, because as their earnings grow and as their share price increases, because they're owning Bitcoin, as Bitcoin goes up, their company becomes more valuable. So they can take out more debt to buy Bitcoin. their share price goes up so they can sell some shares. They can use their shares as collateral to buy more Bitcoin. And that's what Michael Saylor has been doing for years now, is just using that strategy to buy more Bitcoin. So if you get in there early, before the rest of the general public, the average person, figures out what's going on here, you can take advantage of not only the price of Bitcoin, but you have a multiplier effect there with any companies who are holding Bitcoin on their treasury. Because as the price and the value of Bitcoin goes up, so does their share price, so does their equity in the company, because they're holding it as on their balance sheet as an asset. As that asset grows in value, so does their company. It's a brilliant strategy, and I think that we need to be taking advantage of that. So that's what I would say in terms of the easiest thing that you can do there. And that's kind of the starting point. That's what you want to do today. And so you got the Bitcoin ETF, you got MicroStrategy, you got Semlar, and you want to keep an eye out for any other public companies who are holding Bitcoin on their reserve. There's going to be a ton coming. So just get a piece of everyone, and some of them will fail probably, but some of them are going to go through the exact same cycle that MicroStrategy went through, which has been a pretty good return. MicroStrategy has outpaced Bitcoin for the last, 3 years, I think. So this is no joke of a strategy. And I think that part of that, and what you should be focused on here, is that if you are somebody who's fairly new to Bitcoin, or you don't have that level of understanding within Bitcoin, this is the perfect path for you to take, because you're going to get into Bitcoin. You're going to trade in some of your legacy assets there from the old system. You're going to trade that in for Bitcoin. You're going to have price exposure to Bitcoin easily. You don't have to sell. You don't have to cash out. You don't have to pay fees. You don't have to do anything. You just have to slide that over to Bitcoin, and you see the price appreciation. You get to be part of that. You get to be along for the ride of what's coming these next 2 years here in Bitcoin. So over that time, you should be slowly transitioning or instantly transitioning to Bitcoin, and then figuring out a way to cash that out over time. So your transition here looks like legacy system, whatever you're holding now, 60-40 split. I don't know how many people in this chat are doing that, but for the majority of people still are. You move the majority, half of that, say, over to Bitcoin. You get the price appreciation, and then you move that into Bitcoin. You take actual custody of your Bitcoin. You set up a plan. You set up a strategy to move that slowly over time, so you don't get hit with a bunch of fees and a bunch of taxes. And you move that into self-custody Bitcoin. It takes time. And it's not, as I said, this isn't something that you need to do today, but you should be having the conversation with your financial advisor for sure today. And if you manage your own stuff, even better, it'll be easier for you. But have the conversation with your financial advisor. Let them know that this is what you want to do. And if they're not willing to do that, find a new financial advisor. There's way too much at stake here to be fucking around, because as I mentioned earlier in the show, this is a very small window, a very big opportunity for people to acquire as many Satoshis in any sort of way, through the ETF, through other companies, or through buying it yourself, as possible, while uneducated people still accept dollars for them. And so this is a little bit more of a aggressive strategy for sure, compared to what I'm used to talking about on here. Because you're going to be putting more than 4 or 5% or 10%. It's just, you have to think about this. Is it not worth taking the risk for this right now? Because what do you have to lose? You have to think about that. What do you have to lose right now? What are the other options for holding your wealth right now? Like bonds, that's a complete write-off. And I mean, that should be the first thing that you do, is swap your bonds for Bitcoin. But I mean, even if you look at an Apple share, and the majority of people probably in that system are holding indexes, or they're holding the top 7 shares in the stock market. So even if you look at the Apple, let's say that it did happen to go up 30% over the next couple of years. Look at what our fiat system, by that time, a bag of chips is probably going to cost $20. So if you're in that market, if you're in the stock market, if you're in that system, you're hardly keeping up with inflation. If you have a good financial advisor, you're keeping ahead of inflation barely. And if you're not, you're losing money every year. So what are your options here? Because you have to keep in mind that whole stock market is tied to the fiat system. It's all interconnected. So as this thing progresses, as it accelerates, and as the fiat dollars continue to just go to zero pretty much, the stock market and everything in that is tied together. And the only thing that's not tied to that system is Bitcoin. So that's your goal here. You take your existing assets in the old system, you swap them into Bitcoin, the ETF, MicroStrategy, Semlar, and any future public companies that are coming. And slowly over time, you make that transition out of that into Bitcoin, self-custody. And going back to Bruce, the video that we watched there, the whole idea here is to get out of that system. You don't want to be part of a system where they know every single transaction that you do. You don't want that. And the one way to avoid that is Bitcoin. It's not tied to the fiat system, and it's not tracked by the government and the banks. So that's my strategy. As I mentioned, it is a little bit of aggressive if you don't fully understand what's happening here. But I think we're going to look back on this video similar to we did with Tour there 11 years ago. I think we're going to look back on this video, and I think that if you take this advice, you're going to be doing pretty well for yourself. So you want to hook up all of your assets to the Bitcoin train here. You want to enjoy the price appreciation over these next couple of years, and then you want to plan to get out of it, buy Bitcoin, take self-custody of it, and hold your wealth in your own hands. So there you have it, folks. I'm sorry I missed some comments here in the chat, but I wanted to make sure that I got through that. So there we go. The one thing I'll say on that is, sorry, I'm just reading some comments here. Muslim Bitcoiner says it's only a matter of time until Apple's $2 billion in cash, Microsoft's cash, and so on being burned by bonds and need an escape route. And it's going to be Bitcoin. It is. Everyone, every person, every company is eventually going to find an escape route. It's just going to take longer than you. So you have this very small window here, and don't sleep on it, because it's not going to be here forever. Because in probably next year at this time, there's not going to be 3 public companies that own Bitcoin. There's going to be 300 public companies that own Bitcoin. And when that happens, the amount of Satoshis, the amount of Bitcoin that you're going to be able to buy with your dollars is going to be significantly lower. So do not wait on this. Don't just have some Bitcoin here and think that you're going to be set for the rest of your life. You're not. You need to figure out a way to move that money from the old system into Bitcoin. You need to figure out ways to start earning Bitcoin on a daily and monthly basis. And you need to figure out how to protect whatever you do have in Bitcoin.